This is NTD Evening News. Live from our NTD Global Headquarters in New York City, here is Tiffany Meyer.
Good evening, and thank you for joining us tonight. Authorities say a Northern California wildfire that was allegedly started by a man who pushed a burning car into a gully tripled in size in one day. The park fire, located in Butte County in Northern California, has burned more than 178,000 acres near the city of Chico as of late this afternoon. Cal Fire said today the fire was again at 0% contained after it had been 3% contained yesterday. Officials say thousands have been ordered to evacuate and over 100 structures have been destroyed. Investigators have arrested a 42-year-old man suspected of starting the blaze, who will be arraigned Monday. And up north, a raging wildfire has devastated the western Canadian tourist town of Jasper. It damaged or destroyed about half of the town's buildings. Tens of thousands were forced to evacuate the area.
Jasper in Alberta, Canada is a tourist town nestled in the heart of Jasper National Park. The town and surrounding area is struggling with a series of devastating wildfires.
There are 176 wildfires burning in the forest protection area of Alberta. 54 of those are out of control, 50 are being held, and 69 are under control.
As the swift-moving fire approached Jasper earlier this week, authorities ordered the mass evacuation of about 25,000 town residents or tourists visiting the national park. Thousands of evacuees traveled about 250 miles to Calgary for safety. Some of those seeking shelter were momentarily turned away because of staffing issues.
Kind of frustrated for sure by lack of communication, or the communication that we did get not being accurate. But I don't know, I'm just trying not to stress.
Local government officials were empathetic to the problem.
To those evacuees who did not immediately receive assistance, I apologize sincerely. I can only imagine what it must have been like to have to rapidly evacuate and then drive 12 to 15 hours to show up here and be met with closed doors.
A major concern is if the fire damages the Trans Mountain oil pipeline. It carries hundreds of thousands of barrels of oil per day from Edmonton to Vancouver. Parks Canada says the Jasper fire was caused by a lightning strike Monday afternoon and fueled by strong winds. No injuries have been reported so far. Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau said yesterday the government approved Alberta's request for federal aid.
Two of the world's most wanted alleged cartel leaders are in U.S. custody today after one of them helped the FBI in its sting operation. Both men now facing multiple charges, including making and trafficking deadly fentanyl. NTD's Melina Weisskopf has the details.
The Sinaloa cartel is considered one of the most violent and powerful drug trafficking organizations in the world. Its co-founder, known as El Chapo, is currently serving a life sentence in a U.S. prison. And his son, Joaquin Guzman Lopez, helped the police to arrest the cartel's other co-founder, Ismael Zambada, known as El Mayo. He was led onto a plane by El Chapo's son, and authorities later arrested both men in El Paso, Texas on Thursday. Authorities consider Zambada to be one of the most consequential traffickers in Mexico's history. The drugs he's allegedly made and trafficked are said to be the leading cause of death in the U.S. for ages 18 to 45. Zambada appeared in court on Friday and pleaded not guilty to the charges against him.
He is facing charges for fentanyl trafficking, money laundering, firearms offenses, kidnapping, and conspiracy to commit murder.
Guzman Lopez faces lesser charges for trafficking cocaine, heroin, and meth, among other drugs. Mexico's president asked for more details on Friday, saying the U.S. government must be transparent and give a full report on the arrest operation. Authorities say that arresting cartel leaders doesn't stop the flood of deadly drugs. Instead, it will likely lead to cartel infighting before a new leader takes over. Now the DOJ is vowing to continue the fight against drug trafficking.
The Justice Department will not rest until every single cartel leader, member, and associate responsible for poisoning our communities is held accountable.
Reporting from Washington, D.C., Melina Weisskopf, NTD News.
Meeting with the Israeli Prime Minister, former President Trump vows to bring peace to the Middle East if he is re-elected. It comes a day after the Israeli leader met with President Biden and Vice President Kamala Harris. NTD's White House correspondent Iris Tao has more.
In a readout of the meeting, the Trump campaign says Prime Minister Netanyahu thanked former President Trump for promoting stability in the region during his administration, including through the Abraham Accords, moving U.S. Embassy to Jerusalem and eliminating Soleimani. Trump, meanwhile, pledged to make every effort to bring peace to the Middle East and combat anti-Semitism in the U.S. if and when he returns to the White House. The meeting at Trump's Mar-a-Lago comes just a day after Netanyahu met with President Biden and Vice President Kamala Harris separately at the White House. Trump using today's opportunity to criticize Harris's remarks after she met with Netanyahu, during which she reiterated administration's support for Israel but also expressed concerns over the casualties in Gaza. Watch.
Israel has a right to defend itself, and how it does so matters. We cannot allow ourselves to become numb to the suffering, and I will not be silent.
I think her remarks were disrespectful. They weren't very nice, pertaining to Israel. I actually don't know how a person who's Jewish can vote for her.
Netanyahu, meanwhile, responded today by saying that he hopes Harris's comments will not affect a ceasefire deal.
To the extent that Hamas understands that there's no daylight between Israel and the United States, that expedites the deal. And I would hope that those comments don't change that.
Negotiations for a ceasefire deal are ongoing, and the administration says it's coming very close. President Biden today spoke with the King of Jordan to talk about his ongoing efforts to secure a deal and also about preparations to ramp up humanitarian aid during a potential ceasefire period. Meanwhile, in other campaign news, Vice President Kamala Harris today wanted endorsements of Barack and Michelle Obama, who are pretty much the last remaining leaders in the Democratic Party, to endorse her. Harris is set to pick her running mate by August 7th. And this weekend, Pennsylvania Governor Josh Shapiro, a possible VP pick for Harris, is campaigning for Harris in his battleground state. And former President Trump will be campaigning this weekend in Minnesota, a traditionally blue state that he's eyeing to win. He also announced today that he's going back to Butler, Pennsylvania, the town where he was shot 2 weeks ago, to hold another rally. That, he says, is to honor those who were injured and the one firefighting hero who was shot dead. Reporting from the White House, Iris Tao, NTD News.
Railway transport in France falls into chaos after a series of pre-dawn attacks on the country's busiest rail lines. The coordinated acts of vandalism heightened security concerns just hours before the opening ceremony of the Paris Olympic Games. NTD's international correspondent David Vives has the story.
800,000 train commuters are blocked today in France and neighboring countries, according to French State Railway Company. This follows a coordinated sabotage of railways during the night in the country. Many stations are seeing crowds of people waiting with anxiety. Signal boxes have been vandalized along the lines connecting Paris with cities such as Lille in the north, Bordeaux in the west, and Strasbourg in the east. The state-owned railway operator calls the vandalism a massive attack, attempting to block all high-speed lines.
I think that there was a real intention to harm and cause serious harm, since the place also where these fires were caused corresponds to bifurcations.
France's railway company has called for passengers who can postpone their travel to do so. Repairs will occur until the end of the week, significantly disturbing all travels.
Oh, totally nervous about missing it.
Nervous about missing it, yes. Yeah, because it's something that we've planned and we're looking forward to, and it's almost like a once in a lifetime because you don't get to go to that all the time, so we're hoping we make it.
France's Prime Minister said an investigation has just begun and that the perpetrators knew exactly where to strike. David Vives, NTD News, Paris.
Spectators aren't letting bad weather stop them from watching a once-in-a-lifetime Olympic opening ceremony. Hundreds of thousands are gathered along Paris's Seine River to cheer on the procession of athletes and watch performances from mega pop stars. NTD's Fiona G has more.
The Olympic opening ceremony is well underway in the City of Lights. Today marks the final day of the Olympic torch relay, which started over 3 months ago. In the final leg of its journey, the torch was carried by a host of well-known public figures, from the International Olympic Committee President Thomas Bach and former Secretary General of the United Nations Ban Ki-moon, to rappers Snoop Dogg and singer Pharrell Williams. The torch will light the Olympic cauldron tonight, marking the official beginning of the 2024 Paris Summer Olympic Games. Just hours before the start of the opening ceremony, world leaders arrived at the Élysée Presidential Palace. French President Emmanuel Macron welcomed U.S. First Lady Jill Biden, King Felipe of Spain, United Nations Secretary General Antonio Guterres, and British Prime Minister Keir Starmer, among others. Nearly 7,000 athletes sailed 3.5 miles along the Seine, their country's flags in hand. Lady Gaga sang a French song to kick off the ceremony, and Celine Dion is rumored to be performing tonight as well. The final torchbearer who will light the Olympic flame has made multiple appearances already, jumping on the roofs of Paris, identity concealed behind a mask. It is raining in Paris, and storms are predicted later tonight. While most spectators aren't fazed, some are leaving early due to poor weather and poor views. Up to 3 billion people are expected to tune in for the opening ceremony. More than 10,500 athletes will compete at the Olympics, 100 years since Paris last staged the Games. This year, the Olympics will run until August 11th. Fiona G., NTD News.
Welcome back. I'm Tiffany Meyer. Joining us to discuss the Olympics and more, we're joined by NTD's Dave Martin. Dave, a lot going on right now, but let's start in the Olympics, where the Canada women's soccer coach has been removed after complaints by New Zealand that they flew drones over 2 of their practices. What is the latest on this?
Well, the latest is that the Canadian Olympic Committee CEO said that this is head coach Bev Priestman, was likely aware of the drone usage. Now, this story just blew up in the last couple of days. First, Canada Soccer suspended their coach, and then finally, Canadian Olympic Committee has removed her. Now, my question is, where's the International Olympic Committee in all this? I mean, Canada, they're a major power in women's soccer. They wouldn't go to the last games with her as head coach. I think with all that's happened with the Chinese swimmers doping scandal that's erupted from the 2021 games, integrity is really key here. So I don't know why Canada is the only one self-disciplining themselves. Now, to be fair, I've seen reports that the IOC and FIFA are investigating, but the soccer games, they've already started. Canada already beat New Zealand, so time is really of the essence here.
Looking at NBA news, the league is now being sued by Warner Brothers Discovery for breach of contract over losing their TV rights to Amazon. How soon will this case need to be decided?
Well, I mean, this TV agreement starts after the upcoming season, so maybe a year. I mean, I don't think either party or Amazon, courts wants it to take that long. There's preparations to be made, of course, but the NBA has 20 days to respond to this lawsuit, and then we go from there. Now, Warner Brothers Discovery, which owns TNT, released a statement Friday calling the NBA's rejection of their matching offer unjustified, saying this was their contractual right. Meanwhile, an NBA spokesperson said their claims are without merit. Now, this case obviously heated up this week after Warner Brothers announced Monday they were going to match Amazon's offer using their contractual provision that gave them a 5-day window to do so. The NBA then rejected that offer Wednesday, saying they were going with Amazon's offer instead. So it really seems clear that it's going to come down to, is it really a true matching offer, and was the NBA obligated to go with TNT's offer based on their contract or not? So stay tuned.
Well, shifting gears to baseball, the trade deadline is just 4 days away. What can we expect to see as far as blockbuster deals?
Well, we had kind of a medium trade last night. Tampa Bay traded all-star outfielder Randy Arozarena to Seattle for some prospects. Now, Arozarena has a well-earned reputation, one of the best postseason performers of all time, though he's had a bit of a down year this year. And even though Seattle and Tampa Bay have nearly identical records, the Mariners division much easier right now. They're only a game out of first in the AL West. Tampa Bay, they are 10 games out in the East. But I'm really not expecting like a Max Scherzer type blockbuster deal this time around. Usually if you're in the final year of your contract and your team's out of contention and you're a good player, there's a good chance you could get dealt. But no one really fits that bill this year. Juan Soto is having a great year and he's a free agent, but the Yankees aren't not trading him as long as they're in the race, and they definitely are. So I think it will be a busy trade deadline as usual, but I don't see any major stars being dealt.
Well, circling back to the Olympics, we had the opening ceremony today, though some sporting events started Wednesday. Tomorrow, though, is a full slate. What are some things to watch out for? Yeah, like I said, soccer already started on Wednesday. Rugby started as well. A couple others did too. Tomorrow, of course, as you said, full slate. Now, for Americans, swimmer Katie Ledecky will be one to watch tomorrow. This is her 4th Olympics. She's won 7 golds and 3 silvers previously. She'll swim in the 400-meter freestyle tomorrow. Now, Ledecky won this event in 2016 at the Olympics, but finished runner-up
to Australia's Ariane Titmus at Tokyo. And Ledecky, she once went 6 years without losing this event. Those two are expected to be in the running again this year. That starts at 2:55 Eastern time tomorrow. Another fun event to watch Saturday is the men's street skateboarding final. American Nigel Houston is hoping to challenge for gold here in his second Olympics. The finals will be at 11 a.m. Eastern time tomorrow. Now, in addition to those, you also have the U.S. men's soccer team. They'll play New Zealand after already losing to France 3-0 in their opener. That game starts at 1 p.m. Eastern time. Then on Sunday, you've got the U.S. men's basketball team. They play their opener against Serbia, who stars, Nikola Jokic, three-time NBA MVP, and Serbia finished silver last time out, so this will be a close game. That's going to be Sunday morning, 11:15 a.m. Eastern time.
Full slate indeed. Will Davis, always, thanks for joining us.
Well, thank you, Tiff.
With the start of the Olympic Games, the China doping controversy is again raising concern. Several world-renowned swimmers say they hope for a clean competition.
Colin Jones is a world record holder in the 4x100 meter freestyle relay. He's now retired, but he recalls his experience as a competitor in the Olympic Games.
I remember going on vacations and having people show up to test me. So I think when it comes to what WADA does, what all of the anti-doping groups are doing, I think as long as we have a clean sport, that's what I want to see.
In the 2021 Tokyo Games, Chinese swimmers were allowed to compete after failing a drug test. The World Anti-Doping Agency, or WADA, accepted the Chinese claim that the results were due to contamination.
I'm not saying that I don't trust that. I just want to put all my trust in them because I've seen it myself where I was on vacation and got tested, so I know that the work is being done.
The 30-member Chinese swim team won 6 medals in Tokyo, including 3 golds. China's swim team at Paris includes 11 of the 23 athletes reported to have tested positive.
I just hope that everyone is on the same page to make sure that when we have these games, they are clean, and moving forward, they are clean.
An independent investigation backed WADA's handling of the case in its findings this month. Former world and European champion swimmer Camille Lacourt says he prefers to remain optimistic.
I don't know. It's hard. There's 2 ways to look at it. Either you have faith in WADA, and you say to yourself that there was really a problem in China at that moment, and that WADA said, okay, there's a real problem. Or you lose confidence and you forget all the values of the sport.
But questions remain for American 7-time Olympic champion Caleb Dressel. On Thursday, Dressel put simply that he's not confident of a level playing field. There's an ongoing U.S. federal investigation into the suspected doping by Chinese swimmers who competed in Tokyo, but the International Olympic Committee is trying to quash the probe.
Salt Lake City.
The IOC formally awarded the 2034 Winter Games to Salt Lake City this week, but only after Utah officials signed an agreement that pressures them to lobby to federal government to end the investigation.
Lawmakers and industry leaders are opposing a planned electric vehicle battery plant in rural Michigan because of its ties to the Chinese Communist Party. They say the company profits from forced labor. NTD's Washington correspondent Jack Bradley has the details.
Goshen High-Tech, an electric vehicle battery manufacturing company, is planning to open a new facility in Green Charter Township, Michigan, but it's facing pushback from lawmakers and others who say the company uses forced labor and is tied to the Chinese Communist Party.
I've said from the beginning that I want to see this area have more jobs and investment, but we must not welcome companies that are controlled by people who see us as the enemy.
The U.S. military has already banned Goshen batteries. Congressman Darren LaHood of Illinois voiced similar concerns about a Goshen plant in his state.
According to their own bylaws, Goshen is required to, quote, to carry out party activities in accordance with the Constitution of the CCP, unquote.
Goshen sells its batteries to well-known auto manufacturers in the U.S. at cheap prices. The panel says this is possible through forced labor.
The tie between forced labor and human rights abuses in China and Chinese industrial policy is precisely how Beijing cements and spreads its genocide. It's also how China makes sure that the rest of the world can't do anything about it. If we depend on China's genocide, how are we supposed to fight it?
Xinjiang, China is the hub of the Chinese regime's genocide against the Muslim Uyghurs. It's also a critical site for supply and production of battery materials. The panel said that the forced labor problem will only get worse as the electric vehicle market expands in the U.S.
The CCP's strategy is to undercut the civilian markets, overproduce, flood the market with products that are so cheap, so inexpensive that it kills off competition and eliminates access to these products unless you purchase from the CCP.
Now, taking action on this is Congressman John Molinar, the chairman of the House Select Committee on the CCP, which is nonpartisan. He introduced the No Goshen Act, which already has over 20 co-signers, and it would disallow any company that's tied to the Chinese Communist Party from receiving federal tax credits. Reporting from Washington, D.C., Jack Bradley, NTD News.
A North Korean intelligence operative has been indicted for conspiring to hack into NASA and U.S. military bases. He's also accused of hacking American healthcare providers and other international entities. Rim Jung-hyuk was accused by a Kansas City grand jury of stealing sensitive information and using ransomware to fund more attacks. The indictment alleges Rim and his team targeted 17 companies across 11 U.S. states, as well as defense and energy companies in China, Taiwan, and South Korea. The hacks also disrupted the treatment of patients in U.S. hospitals. Rim's team is also accused of extracting over 17 gigabytes of unclassified data from NASA's system. The group had access to NASA's computer system for more than 3 months. A Sunday election could end 25 years of socialist rule in Venezuela. President Nicolas Maduro is currently trailing in the polls. A loss for Maduro could strongly affect the United States and its border crisis. NTD's international correspondent Arian Pazdar has more from South America.
Socialist Nicolas Maduro is running for a third term as Venezuela's president this Sunday. He's the successor of Hugo Chavez. Venezuela has been under socialist rule for 25 years now under these two leaders. But Maduro is trailing in the polls behind his challenger, Edmundo González, who's leading by a whopping 20 to 30 percentage points. González is being supported by the party's leader, Maria Corina Machado, who's been banned from running for president last year. Many are now concerned that Maduro's regime will try to rig the election, as his challenger previously warned.
To the international community, we ask you to accompany us closely in this process because it will be decisive in reducing migration.
The White House on Thursday also expressed concerns.
To Mr. Maduro, that we're watching closely. They need to be free and fair elections, free of repression, free of voter intimidation.
To find out how Venezuela's election could impact the United States, I spoke with Marcus Schottges. He's the editor-in-chief for the Epoch Times Brazil.
That's really what this election is about. It's about Maduro versus not Maduro.
Schottges tells me that Maduro's regime has been waging an indirect war against the U.S., as the Department of Justice found in 2020.
How has Maduro been involved in international drug trafficking during his reign?
So, the 2020 indictment by the DOJ talks about this conspiracy to flood the United States with cocaine. And the DOJ report says that it's possible that was done not only for economic reasons, but also ideologically, to oppose the U.S., to wage asymmetrical warfare against the U.S. So we could see that the narco-trafficking operations coming from Venezuela to the U.S. could lessen at the southern border.
A quarter of Venezuela's population has left the country under Maduro, almost 8 million people. Many of them have immigrated into the U.S. illegally. Schottges says this is one of the largest exodus of people in modern history not caused by a war. But this could change under new leadership.
If Venezuela is able to take its own population back, that would also lessen refugees.
Now, it's important to note that even allies of Maduro have expressed concerns about election integrity in his country. For example, Brazil and other Latin American countries have recently withdrawn from a committee overseeing the elections in Venezuela. Reporting from Brazil, Arian Pastar, NTD News.
Welcome back. If you're just joining us now, here are some of today's top headlines. Saboteurs attacked and vandalized France's rail lines just hours before the Paris Olympic Games opening ceremony, causing chaos and widespread delays for travelers. But the opening ceremony kicked off as planned, with athletes parading through the River Seine and performances from guest stars. The park fire in Northern California has tripled in size and is 0% contained. Authorities say the blaze was started by an individual who pushed a burning car into a gully and have arrested a 42-year-old man on suspicion of arson. Two of the world's most wanted alleged Mexican drug kingpins are in U.S. custody today. They are Joaquin Guzman Lopez, the son of former Sinaloa cartel boss El Chapo, and Ishmael Zambada, also known as El Mayo. It's one of the biggest victories for U.S. law enforcement against the cartels. Former President Barack Obama and Michelle Obama both endorsed Kamala Harris as Democratic Party leaders continue to rally around her presidential bid. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu met with former President Trump, who vowed to bring peace to the Middle East if he's reelected. This comes just a day after Netanyahu met with President Biden and Vice President Kamala Harris. Harris said she urged Netanyahu to agree to a hostage and ceasefire deal. And joining us now live for further discussion on Netanyahu's visit to the U.S. is Middle East Affairs Analyst for the Center for Security Policy, David Wormser. David, great to see you again. Thanks for joining us. To begin, Netanyahu met with Trump today after meeting separately with President Biden and VP Harris yesterday, as well as addressing a joint session of Congress this week. But how do you read the Trump meeting today?
Sure. Good to be with you, Tiffany. I think the Trump meeting went very well. The greeting was extremely warm. The discussions were warm. They've exchanged gifts and so forth. So I think whatever concerns there were from the previous administration with the previous Trump administration have been laid to rest. The relationship between the Netanyahus and Trump is pretty warm and in a good place. But it also contrasted with the meeting a lot yesterday with Vice President Harris, where it was quite cold a greeting, and afterwards there was a press briefing by Vice President Harris, and she was almost angry at Israel, very, very harsh tone. So you could really see the difference. That in turn contrasted to the meeting with President Biden, which was actually relatively warm. So we see sort of a range of results in these personal meetings.
On that note, reports say Netanyahu handed Trump a framed photo of a child who was taken hostage by Hamas during the early days of the war. Trump saying, quote, "We'll get it taken care of." Now, during the last Trump administration, there were the Abraham Accords. What do you see coming out of a second Trump presidency in terms of the Middle East?
Yeah, I think one of the key lines in Prime Minister Netanyahu's speech to Congress 2 days ago was that if Israel emerges from this war strong, it will help keep American boots off the ground in the Middle East. And then he outlined this strategic vision for the region, and that's really was playing directly to President Trump and to Vice President Vance. He was basically saying, we know America has alliances around the world that are stressed or taxed right now. You don't need to put more boots in the region. You don't need to worry about the region. But to do so, you need to allow Israel to emerge strongly and anchor an alliance, a local alliance that carries the water and allows America to relatively disengage. So I think that's really the operative plan for the Trump administration and the Israeli government, is to win, emerge strong, and then anchor America's interests in the region rather than have the American people pay the price of constant engagement and deployments.
In terms of the speech Netanyahu gave to Congress this week, do you think he was successful in speaking to both the American people and Israelis at home? How did you read his speech?
Well, ironically, probably a little bit more to American people than Israelis. You can see he grew up here, so he had quite an American cultural attribute to him. And he actually spoke with some subtleties. If anybody who deals with Israel knows that subtleties are usually lost on Israelis. So that was an effect, but it really went over well for both countries. One, for the Americans, he got 58 rounds of applause, more, which is really unbelievable. And it's also the fourth speech of his to Congress, which is a record. So he was received very warmly, and the signal was sent to the Arab world, specifically to Hamas and Hezbollah and Iran, Israel's enemies, that Israel stands shoulder to shoulder with America, and there's really no daylight between the two as nations. And then the Israelis also felt from the speech the warmth of the American reception. And, you know, these are lonely days for Israel. Around the world, they're under siege. Everywhere their athletes go or their singers go, they're assaulted. There's calls for Israel's destruction in every corner of the earth. And to have the great superpower America show such warmth to their prime minister tells the Israelis, you're not alone. And that matters a lot to the Israeli people.
Zooming out a bit, British Prime Minister Keir Starmer's office said today that the UK will not intervene in the ICC's request for an arrest warrant against Netanyahu. Now, that is a reversal of plans announced by the previous Prime Minister, Rishi Sunak. What is your reaction to this? Is international sentiment toward Israel changing?
Yeah, it's ugly. Elections matter. The left, far left, Labour Party was elected in Britain, and this is the consequence. But I think that there's also sort of a danger to what they're doing and what's being done. I mean, apart from the fact that the precedent set for the International Criminal Court asserting its jurisdiction in areas which it really doesn't have jurisdiction applies to the United States too, and our troops and our leadership. So I think what the International Criminal Court is doing and what Britain now is unfortunately participating in is such a over-the-top action that it will breed an American reaction. Once again, we don't know where the American elections will go, but if they do go to the right, this could be the end of the International Criminal Court's, the tolerance of the United States for the International Criminal Court. Even if say Kamala Harris is elected as vice president, if you have a conservative Congress, they could easily take measures and actions that are quite nasty against the International Criminal Court because of this.
David Wormser, Middle East Affairs Analyst for the Center for Security Policy. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.
The Israel Defense Forces have reported significant gains in their recent operations in the Gaza Strip. This comes as a major general visited troops in northern Israel, where he talked about putting boots on the ground in Lebanon. NTD's Jason Perry has the war update and a warning: this report contains footage that some viewers may find disturbing.
Israel Defense Forces are keeping up the intensity as they battle Hamas terrorists in Khan Yunis in the southern Gaza Strip. On Friday, Israeli forces reported killing about 100 terrorists since Monday, when their latest operation began in the southern Gaza city. They also reported killing these terrorists in Rafah. And another terrorist came and took their weapon, and the IDF killed him as well. And in the northern Gaza Strip, they reported destroying anti-tank missile firing positions and buildings rigged with explosives. They also destroyed this terror tunnel that was over half a mile long. And at a hospital in the central Gaza Strip, this resident said a missile hit her relatives, and the only survivor was their 2-year-old daughter.
She is in intensive care in Al-Aqsa Martyrs Hospital, which suffers from a lack of medical capabilities and resources, even the simplest medical capabilities, such as a bed.
Israel has repeatedly accused Hamas of hiding within the civilian population. Meanwhile, a senior fellow at the International Assessment and Strategy Center, Rick Fisher, gave his insight into the war.
The October 7, 2023 Hamas war against Israel was essentially made in China. It was Chinese economic and military technology support that allowed Iran to turn Hamas into an offensive force, into a proxy. And Iran trained and even led the Hamas war. Brutal, nasty, just awful, awful war. And Iran has prepared Hezbollah to the north of Israel to conduct an even more devastating war.
So far, tens of thousands of Israelis have been forced to leave their homes in northern Israel because of Hezbollah terrorists firing projectiles into the region. And this week, Major General Ori Gordon met with troops in northern Israel. He said they had killed 500 terrorists in Lebanon, and that's without boots on the ground. But that could change soon.
When the moment comes and we go on the offensive, it will be a decisive offensive. And the reality we are building now in terms of striking the other side and pushing the enemy back, enables us to carry out this offensive in a very, very high-quality way.
The Iran-backed Hezbollah terrorist group said they will continue to attack Israel for as long as Israel continues the war in the Gaza Strip. Jason Perry, NTD News.
Congress is now in recess until mid-September. When lawmakers return to the Capitol, they'll have 2 weeks to fund the government for another year. Our Washington correspondent Luis Martinez has details on the appropriations process for fiscal year 2025.
The House Appropriations Committee has passed all 12 appropriation bills, but on the House floor, Republicans have only managed to pass 5 bills. The legislative branch failed, and the water and energy bill had to be pulled from a vote. When confronted with these shortcomings, House appropriators point their fingers at the Senate.
We're way ahead of the Senate, so I mean the question ought to be asked why the Democrat-controlled Senate hasn't brought a single bill to the floor yet.
House Republicans admit that their bills have been drafted on party lines, but insist that the process must play out regardless.
The Senate won't take up any conservative riders. They won't even take up the numbers. The Senate won't even conference with us. When's the last time we conferenced with the Senate? That's what you're supposed to do. We need to take the bills that are out of committee now, so they are our position in the committee level. Tell the Senate we want to sit down tomorrow.
Lawmakers, Republican and Democrat, expect to have to vote on a continuing resolution when Congress reconvenes in mid-September.
No, absolutely, it was not good. You know, Kevin McCarthy got 7 of the 12 passed before he was wrongfully ousted, and then now Mike Johnson has gotten 5. They're probably going to be forcing us to vote on a CR. I won't be continuing Nancy Pelosi's budget from last Congress, which is what has been going on.
Since 1977, only in 4 occasions has Congress passed all 12 appropriation bills to fund government. On every other year, a minibus or an omnibus or a continuing resolution have had to be signed into law. Reporting from Washington, D.C., Luis Eduardo Martinez, NTD News.
Welcome back. I'm Tiffany Meyer. Now for an update on the 2 astronauts stuck on the International Space Station. Boeing and NASA said they may have found the root cause of the problem, but they won't be able to get the stranded astronauts home just yet. Here's that story.
Test pilots Butch Wilmore and Sonny Williams are already a month late getting back to Earth. On Thursday, more bad news. After weeks of testing to find out what went wrong on the Starliner spacecraft, NASA and Boeing officials said they still aren't ready to bring the astronauts back.
We don't have a major announcement today relative to a return date. We're making great progress, but we're just not quite ready to do that.
But they said they have some clues about why the spacecraft malfunctioned. Officials at Boeing said engineers tried to replicate how the Starliner's thrusters ignited more than 1,000 times. They did this to understand why the thrusters suddenly shut down mid-flight and if it would be safe to turn them back on. Officials said the testing led them to understand the root cause of the failure.
The last several weeks have been really helpful to understand the helium and thruster anomalies and how to address these problems for future flights. That's been the real goal here, is to be able to address future flights and to gain the confidence that we needed for this mission.
5 thrusters failed as the capsule approached the space station on June 6th. 4 have since been reactivated. The manager of Boeing's Commercial Crew Program, Mark Nappy, said the tests have given them additional confidence to undock from the space station and return. NASA's Commercial Crew Program manager Steve Stitch says they're getting closer to a plan to get the astronauts back home, but they also have backup plans in place. These include using a SpaceX capsule to bring the astronauts back. But Stitch said the priority is using the original Boeing craft to return.
I think we're starting to close in on those final pieces of the flight rationale to make sure that we can come home safely. And that's our primary focus right now. We have contingency options. We've put those in play. NASA always has contingency options.
Wilmore and Williams were supposed to spend a week aboard the space station and return in mid-June. They're both seasoned astronauts who said earlier they're not complaining about getting extra time in orbit. In a press conference from space, Williams told reporters she has a good feeling that the spacecraft will bring them home.
And what do the top ranking cities for fitness have in common? A new report ranked the largest American cities on fitness level and infrastructure. The aim is to promote activity and longevity. NTD's David Lamb has the story.
The American College of Sports Medicine and Elevance Health Foundation ranked the 100 largest U.S. cities in the annual American Fitness Index. Arlington, Virginia, Washington, D.C., and Seattle, Washington took the top 3 this year. Arlington ranked first 7 years in a row.
But I wasn't surprised, only because they've maintained their high personal health indicators, i.e. 88% of their citizens are active daily, when the average American, only about 25% of the U.S. exercises on a daily basis.
Stella Volpe, who heads the ACSM and has a PhD in human nutrition and foods, told NTD the top cities have resources to have better environments, thus access to being active. The report was based on data from the CDC and each of the cities. Arlington had the highest rate of residents exercising in the previous month, around 88%.
So a place like Arlington has really great access to their citizens for bike trails, walking trails, good sidewalks, a close proximity to parks, tennis courts, pools, recreation centers. And many of those citizens walk to public transportation, then go to public transportation and walk to their jobs.
It takes good infrastructure from the city as well as a lifestyle. Almost 40% of Washington, D.C. residents ate 2 or more fruits a day.
That exercise is medicine, but I don't want people to think exercise has to be go all out. It can be physical activity.
According to Statista Research Department, in 2022, the United States was the highest spender worldwide when it comes to healthcare. As of 2022, the U.S. has spent over $4 trillion on healthcare. Worldwide, the World Health Organization says global spending on health continually rose for nearly 2 decades and reached more than $8 trillion in 2018. Volpe says physical activity and good nutrition could reduce chances of diseases, leading to lower healthcare costs and better quality of life.
Moving, walking, gardening, getting up, every hour and just moving, dancing, little things like that all count toward minutes of physical activity. And if people can get moving, I think they'll feel better physically as well as mentally.
David Lamb, NTD News.
And that's all for today's news. For round-the-clock coverage, visit us at ntd.com or download our NTD app. Thanks for tuning in. I'm Tiffany Meyer. Good night.